Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Dorr. I am the Director of Professional Development for the International Studies Association. For those of you who are not familiar with the International Studies Association, we are the largest association dedicated to understanding transnational and global affairs, and we are currently based in global affairs at the University of Connecticut. So today I am here with Lauren Tucker. She is an instructor at Southern Connecticut State University, and she's going to be talking to us about AI hacks for higher ed and prompting recipes, custom GPTs, and smarter presentations. So the structure of today's session is that Lauren has a presentation prepared, and then there will be time at the end for any questions and comments. I would encourage you to put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A feature, but please feel free to add them throughout Lauren's presentation when they come up, and I will turn it over to Lauren now.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you in a topic that I'm very passionate and excited about. So I am first, before I get started, I am going to share a link to the presentation in the chat. Also, the link in the chat goes to the full Google Slides presentation. However, what I want to highlight for you as well, that there is a QR code on my screen that will bring you to an accessible handout with only text of the links and content and information in the presentation as well. So that is a link right there, link to the presentation. And then, like I said, you can take the QR code, and I'll also put a link to this handout as well in the chat for you. Let's see, link to handout. All right. So now let's get started. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my AI hacks for higher ed. And so here are the objectives today. So we're going to start off with exploring AI-powered workflows to support teaching, research, and administration. I'm really going to share a lot of the workflows, the tools, everything that I utilize within kind of my professional space to help you, again, to find the workflow or the recipe or kind of the toolkit to help you do the same. We will also practice creating effective prompting recipes for a higher education context. And I do find that that is the biggest impact, the biggest indicator of the highest quality of AI tools or outputs that you can get is the quality of your recipe. We will talk, which is extremely important, about AI risks, misinformation bias, ethical misuse, and I'll share some resources for you as well to kind of keep abreast to that situation. And then hopefully you'll kind of have a plan afterwards to apply some tools to create, again, some custom GPTs, presentations, or some instructional visuals. So just a little bit about me so that you know the lens at which I'm coming from. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently a professor in the special education department at Southern, and my background is I was a special ed teacher in the K through 12 system, transitioned into assistive technology, where I work with technology to support individuals with disabilities. And I'm a big, passionate supporter of universal design for learning. And so my primary student base at Southern is graduate students. And so I'm always thinking about how can I utilize AI to enhance student engagement after they've been working all day long, and even to help them, because I'm in education, how do I help address burnout? So how do I help make sure that I'm using and teaching AI tools ethically and responsibly? So I will admit that I over prepared for today. So I've got a lot of content. So as Sarah mentioned, please feel free to add your comments or questions within the chat, and I will likely address them at the end, but if something is super relevant, I will talk about it kind of as I'm going through. Here's our roadmap. So we'll just kind of do a very brief overview of artificial intelligence at the beginning, just to kind of start off. I will give my bulk of my presentation is going to talk about AI tools available for higher ed classrooms, and how you can then utilize those. And then I also want to share with you perspectives from graduate students. So I have been doing some research this year on kind of impacts of AI on student learning. And so I'm going to share some of those reflections and just kind of some preliminary findings as well. So I just, again, want to go over some very brief to set the stage for some AI basics. So what is artificial intelligence, right? We're looking at machine-based systems. So helping and given a set of human-defined objectives, it really is looking at language analysis. It can help with making predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. So this definition comes from the National Artificial Intelligence Act. But really, AI at this point in time is how rapidly as it's changing, it isn't integrated in almost every tool or system that we are interacting with in a technology age. And so it really is thinking about how then do we each as individuals actively interact with AI, because we are passively interacting with it pretty consistently. So this is the AI that we know. I think that is generally, again, almost passively thrown at us. We have facial recognition, social media algorithms consistently, the word prediction that we experience on either our smartphones or within our email on our laptops. Any grammar support, I'd say that that's one of my most favorite. I use Grammarly all the time. And smart homes devices and speakers. And so that again is kind of embedded in things that we know, and we are kind of passively engaging. But why should we be considering AI in the higher education classroom? And I do see that there's a question that we'll talk about at the end, but the beginning of the question is talking that AI is inevitable, and it is. It is here. And it is rapidly being adapted in the professional spaces and personal spaces. And I do believe it is a responsibility of us in higher education to then also integrate it within our classrooms so that our students within our courses know how to engage with it responsibly. So I did want to share, so this is an updated survey, but it's still outdated given the fact that with AI changing so rapidly. This is from 2023, so I would argue that this data is outdated, but it still gives a kind of appropriate snapshot of what students are kind of engaging with. So this is only 1,000. The population was 1,000. Higher education students ranging from 17 to 49, but asking them mainly about their engagement with AI. And so what the graph is depicting here is how students have utilized or engaged with AI, and the majority of them have engaged with AI. They've used AI tools to help complete assignment or exams, 56% of them. I have had coursework that requires me to use AI, which is 53%. When I've presented previously, an earlier iteration of this survey did not have that high of a percentage that AI was incorporated within coursework. So we've really made some rapid changes there. And I've had at least one instructor discuss the use or ethics of AI in the classroom. And now that number is at 80%. And so it's there, it's happening, right? And so now, how do we then, especially as professionals in the field of higher ed, how do we engage with it continually for ourselves and for our students? Here, this is also pretty interesting. The program or school has a policy about the use of generative AI. So 58% of students responded yes, but then we had 28%, which is interesting, said that courses or instructors, some have policies and some do not, which I do find very interesting. So that was 28%, no is 10%, and then 5 is I don't know. And I also found this, so this was a breakdown that wasn't available previously in their previous version of this survey. The instances of use by demographics. And so what I find very interesting is, I think, counter to kind of what you would instinctively think. Gen Z is not as frequently using AI as millennials, which I find really interesting. So you can see the millennials there are around like 62%, and Gen Z is around that like 52%. Men are reporting AI use more than women, and business majors are also reporting AI use more than other kind of areas. And so I just find this kind of in terms of context of what we're talking about very interesting when we look at our students. And again, because this data is outdated, I do think that the instances here are higher, but it's nice to kind of actually see kind of some of this information. So guided use is crucial for students, and that is one thing that I am extremely passionate about. And that's why these hacks for me are so important as we are kind of embarking in higher ed on using AI. How do we then guide our students' use, but feel comfortable in our own professional use? And this starts off with just thinking about and acknowledging the ways that AI can be problematic. And the question in the chat, and I actually just saw an article on this as well about talking about how difficult or problematic it is that when people say thank you or utilize manners with AI, kind of the amounts of electricity waste that there is in those interactions, and that kind of negative implications when it comes to water and electricity consumption. And I think this goes into being able to then support our students with that meaningful engagement. In, okay, what are the biases? Because beyond just kind of the environmental impacts, there are very strong and significant AI biases that we as professors, as professionals, need to acknowledge ourselves, but then also impart on our students. And this is what I find is the most dangerous piece if it is an unguided experience and we are just using AI to complete work, to spend less time. And so the biases, the lacking perspectives. So there is kind of significant data out there saying that there are kind of marginalized perspectives are not included within the data set or the algorithm of many large language models. So there is very specific exclusionary and inclusionary criteria that are not transparent and aren't required to be transparent. There can be loads of false information. The hallucinations that many AI bots can produce because they are so smart, that I'm sorry, I'm chuckling in the chat. And it's funny because that has almost kind of been my perspective. So in the chat, someone noted, I know it uses more electricity and computing power to say thank you or please, but honestly, I'd rather be nice to our future overlords. And I think there is that kind of piece. I don't know if anyone has read there was an article published, a research article in March, that ChatGPT passed the Turing project or the Turing test. And I can drop that in the chat after once I find it. But essentially when generative AI was put with a human partner, I think it was 75% of the time, the human partner identified that they were talking to another human, not to AI generated, an AI computer. And so I do think that our computer's ability to replicate human interactions is extremely high right now, and happening. But okay, I'm going to go back to that other question. So it can provide that false information, which is crucial for not only us as professionals, but also for our students. And then the other piece that I find is when organizations are utilizing AI for decision making, that can be a very dangerous place because often these decisions are not transparent. And if there isn't good human oversight, right, there can be a lot of kind of reinforcing of discrimination and prejudices. So for example, under predicting academic potential for multilingual students, right? And so that's something that we, especially in higher ed, when we're looking for more kind of automation because of our budgeting difficulties, we want to make sure that we're cognizant of the implications of that. So here I just wanted to share some resources. So as I mentioned in my introduction, so my background is in special education and I'm very passionate about accessibility. And I do find that this webinar is very eloquently describes how individuals with disabilities are left out of many AI algorithms and AI models. And so I wanted to provide this for you just as kind of some additional research. Samuel Prue is the one who presents it, and he is fabulous. And so I highly recommend, but he essentially discusses how so many of these AI tools aren't including individuals with disabilities and reinforcing biases. And I think we've seen this quite a bit. Here's just kind of, I have another visual on my screen about how AI systems can amplify biases. So the image recognition, so here it is an individual cooking, and the AI has a bias against with women cooking, right? So there's a man cooking, but the AI is interpreting it as a woman because there is a female bias towards this kind of domestic behavior. Oh, absolutely. I will fix that download feature for you so that you can download it. Absolutely. And so this has been acknowledged and been in the news quite a bit. And so, but I do feel like as it's being fixed, new problems occur. And so always kind of acknowledging as we are developing different hacks and tools and supporting our students, we always want to acknowledge that high likelihood of error or discrimination. Oops. And now I want to kind of, after that kind of general brief foundation, I want to focus on AI that we can get to know. So here's my hacks feature. This is the AI. So I'm mainly going to share a lot of the tools that I utilize, how I utilize them. Here I'm going to switch now. When you are in the presentation, there are some questions here about how you are able to download the presentation. Under here, you can either, if you are a Google person, you can go to make a copy of the entire presentation, or you can go into download and you can download it as a PowerPoint presentation or as a PDF if you would prefer. I hope that should work for everyone. Okay. So I utilize, when I am talking about AI, I will say that I generally utilize ChatGPT. So a lot of my examples are going to focus more on ChatGPT. So that's one of the, I'd say the original and kind of one of the classic versions. It is a text generation tool. It learns from your prompts. Some students have shared with me the ways that they've used ChatGPT. Is there are used it for speeches, right? When they need to kind of, a lot of them talk to me about like wedding speeches, so personal use, improving professional tone of papers, right? So many different options. So here are just some of the powers. I've provided some examples of ways that I've used ChatGPT. So I've asked it to give me like an argument against AI in the higher education classroom. So these are links to just conversations I've had within ChatGPT in terms of tech integrated lesson plans. And this one here, which is what I really liked, and I have been using a lot of AI tools for activities of this nature, where I ask, instead of kind of explicitly teaching standards, rules within legal aspects, because I'm in special ed and there's a lot of legislation, what I often will do will ask about create me a case study that violates specific aspects of these regulations. And so then it helps my students to kind of put those laws, and something like that would take me a really long time to do. But with ChatGPT and referencing the particular kind of standard or legal attribute that I am looking at can take, it takes it seconds. And then I'm auditing the content and fixing it and adjusting it. Um, and so I really like kind of thinking about ways that I can improve my practice, improve my engagement, especially for my graduate students in utilizing AI. So I have a couple examples of just kind of how I have previously used ChatGPT in very general before I talk more specifically about my chatting. There was a question previously about like, how do you keep up, right? And what if your university does not provide explicit training or support? And I'm a big social media person. I actually did my dissertation on informal learning through social media, which is fascinating. And ironic that here I am now, but and so I do a lot, I follow a lot of kind of tech gurus because what I utilize is I use my professional kind of resources within my social media to kind of purge, right? And filter out content. I identify people or organizations that have kind of similar goals as I do. And then I follow them in order for them to kind of filter content and provide it to me. And so the AI experience is one of those accounts that I really like, specifically because they provide these visuals on like advanced prompting mastery sheets. So I am drawn to visuals. And so I tend to follow accounts or resources that will do the same. So what I really like about the visual on my screen is it kind of gives you this prompting recipe, and it gives you some examples of ChatGPT prompts that you can utilize in order to kind of learn more information. And under at the bottom, it gives some different examples to simplify complex information, learn from mistakes, use the 80-20 method so you can give it kind of context and ask it to implement within the content that you are creating. And it talks a little bit about this prompting recipe. So that's what I want to go into now. Oh, here's another kind of big example of prompts. I want to go back first. Here we go. And this is another significant aspect of AI that I want to come, not a hack, right? But I think it is a foundational core piece. When I do share the research about the Turing test, they did test ChatGPT or generative AI with a human prompt and without. So when it was asked to act like a human, right? When it was given a specific prompt, or when it was just kind of open and left to its own devices. And so this research also does emphasize the power of prompting and how important that is. And so the way that I've kind of developed and I utilize AI is I have the full version of ChatGPT, and I create conversations where I have fully prompted kind of my generative AI so that every time I go back in, I don't need to reprompt it. And so here, what you want to think about is a reusable structure that you might have if you are kind of working on classes. So for example, I have one where I'm talking about presentations. And so I have like my AI presentations conversation, I have an accessibility presentation or conversation, and then I have conversations for each of the courses that I'm teaching, where I then prep it and kind of give it my context. And so here I have kind of a very basic prompting recipe. So you are a blank, write a blank about a blank. For, and so kind of focusing on you are, and I will always kind of give it, you are a special education professor, passionate about universal design for learning, and you want to then create, right? So here you can also try it. So this is a very blanket, so I'm going to copy and paste and put this in the chat for you. So if you want to play around, but I'm going to go into ChatGPT. So there is a question about kind of saving conversation. So I have my ChatGPT open right now. And as I mentioned, so I am using the full version. And I'm saving conversation. So over here on my left toolbar are truly all of my conversations that I have that I save. In the free version, you can save a certain number of conversations as well. And so that's how I reuse my prompting structures is I will create my prompt and then I will go back into that conversation because it remembers. So here what I want to mention, so I gave you that prompting structure within the chat, and now I'm putting it here. And I'm going to hit kind of go, and I didn't add any additional context here. So now ChatGPT is giving me like a specific syllabus and outline for a course on universal design for learning. It talks about course description, learning objectives, and it will kind of continue on. What I want to show you now is when I adjust some of my adjectives or my prompting structures within my prompt so you can see the difference between my output. And that's really what I want to highlight for you today in order to really focus on the highest quality content you can. So here's my syllabus, the major assignments. Okay, so I'm going to paste the prompt in the bottom here, but let's see, you are a special education professor. Who implements, let's see, accessibility practices, uses and effective adult learning strategies. Preparing your syllabus. Let's see, draft including materials, including, so now I can do videos, podcasts, and articles from diverse authors. Highlighting the importance of diverse perspectives. The other piece that I do a lot is you'll notice there I added, please provide direct links to all resources. And here, so I've made some changes, right? I've told them, you know, I am a professor, I am a special ed professor, right? So I'm giving it that context around which I want to develop this course. Then I talked about, okay, but I want a variety of different materials and a variety of different perspectives. And that's something that I find by default, AI will often have a singular perspective. And so it's really, really important for us to acknowledge that we need to actively call upon diversity and call upon diverse perspectives because it by default often won't do that. And so here, I've also now asked it for links to the resources. And this is something that some tools do. If you utilize Copilot, Copilot at times will provide the links automatically for you, but ChatGPT does not. So I find I will call upon it to provide me the resources or the links where it got its content. And that's something that is very important so that it becomes easier for you to audit and check the validity of the content. So here, now we are talking more about universal design and disability and that relationship. And you'll notice that is a very different syllabus than the original one. And so that's the power of your prompt, is that the more specific with the more adjectives, the more specific around the context and the tone that you utilize, the better quality you get. Oh, and someone wrote in the chat too, I like Perplexity AI because it always provides links to resources, right? Perplexity, I also think, like I said, Copilot usually will as well. So there's learning within your toolkit, right? Which tool provides the best kind of alignment with what you're looking for. So I'm gonna kind of, that was one of my demonstrations of kind of the power of the prompts. So I'm gonna go back to my presentation now. So again, when you're thinking about your prompt template, and I often do this with my students as well, if I'm then asking them to utilize AI for a specific portion of an activity, I will often give them an example of a prompt structure or push that. So analyzing the task, design the structure, right? So what do you want it to kind of output for you in different situations, and then continually test it. So I will always kind of test how I talk about, like, when I want it to revamp a syllabus or provide supports for me. I think about I use a lot of evidence-based practices, and when I want to pull on something specific, I kind of adjust that. So here's again, which I also find is really interesting. Oh, I cannot get out of writing Twitter in X. So teach me how something works by asking questions about my level of understanding. And I've used this quite a bit for my graduate students, this prompt. For when they are practicing for standardized tests or practicing for kind of a content knowledge check, I will encourage them to try and utilize a prompt similar to this to interact with ChatGPT or a generative AI tool to help them study. What I really like as well is I will sometimes also utilize the live chat option. Again, I apologize, I'm showing my bias, but I do utilize ChatGPT. But this live chat option can be very powerful. I use it specifically when I'm working with students who are prepping for interviews or challenging conversations. And this is where also the prompt comes in very significantly. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And I'm going to pull up So this is available now. So I'm going to show you the live chat feature. I am on the mobile version of ChatGPT. You can do this on the web-based version, and ChatGPT also has a phone number now. So you can call 1-800-CHAT-GPT and you can talk to ChatGPT, which is great because it kind of increases access for individuals who might not have access to a smartphone or to consistent internet. But here's one of the things that I really like about kind of finding a prompting structure that works and then utilizing it in a school environment. Role play with me. You are a principal hiring for a special education teacher. Please ask me an interview question and provide a critical critique of my response and suggestions to improve it.
Sure, let's get started. Here's a question for you. Can you describe a time when you successfully collaborated with general education teachers to support a student with disabilities in an inclusive classroom? Take your time and then I'll give you feedback on your response.
I've worked with regular ed teachers when some of my students were having behavior problems.
Thanks for sharing that. Your response highlights that you have experience collaborating with general education teachers, which is great. To improve, you could add specific details about the situation, the strategies you implemented, and the outcomes. For example, you might say, I collaborated.
What I also love about this, so I do find it is overly positive. So that's why I say critical feedback, and it still is like, that was a good start. I'm like, no, that was not a good answer. So I do kind of tell my students again to be a little bit careful. But what I love about this is that now it also provides my transcript. and it will ask you the questions, it will provide an appropriate response. And that's where I find I will often give my students options for prompting in order for them to utilize this voice feature or calling ChatGPT to then practice for some of these more oral aspects of what their professional goal is, like interviewing or studying, right? If they're prepping for an oral presentation or a doctoral review. Ooh, interesting. So there's a question is about, isn't that plagiarism? So can you, when we're talking about an interview and prepping for an interview, which part would you say is plagiarism? I guess maybe if you can ask a more clarifying question. Or if you don't mind. There was a question in the chat about, isn't it plagiarism? So I like the transcript, right? Because it will give you opportunities to practice and read through your kind of responses. But I would say that when you are practicing in this instance, it would not be plagiarism because it is critiquing your response. So I do know that there's a lot of debate about kind of plagiarism and generative AI. In this particular scenario, when you are using it to role play and practice for interviewing, I don't believe it is plagiarism in my opinion. But I do think that then, I mean, you can always take a transcript directly from AI, and that would be problematic. But I also believe that talking to students about kind of being transparent in terms of when they use AI and how to make it kind of their own is really important. So I do think that there's always a line. And I will talk a little bit more kind of about kind of the emphasis of making sure that AI is a tool and not kind of the process to avoid that kind of plagiarism. Let's see. So I'm going to address the next question at the end. But so one of the things I wanted to share that I've been utilizing within my courses, so beyond just the general generative AI, I utilize GPTs. And so a GPT is a kind of specific line of generative AI that has a very specific content. And so what I really like about this is, for example, when I am teaching an asynchronous course, I will develop a GPT based on my syllabus and my assignments. And I think about any of the common questions that I get via email. What I also like about this is I will then test my GPT as well. And if I ask it questions like, when are the major assignments due? And if it doesn't answer me correctly, then I probably know that my syllabus is not as effective as it could be. There was a question previously about how do you revise an existing syllabus? Within many of these generative AI tools, at the bottom here, I'm on ChatGPT. You can upload a file. So you can upload a syllabus and then you can ask it to give you feedback on how it would suggest to improve or integrating things so you can. And I also have Copilot up here. And in Copilot, and now I have Copilot attached to my university account. So I have the full version through my university, and the same option is you have an add content piece. I do find that AI is not good at formatting, so it will mess up the formatting of a file if you ask it to kind of fix something, but it does kind of help with, here's the previous content, what would you analyze? What would you suggest? I often will be like, pick it apart just to kind of see what it might say. Come back here. So the custom GPT. So I have a couple of links for you here. I use a tool called Tango, and Tango is another AI tool that I love as I'm training on technology a lot. It will then allow you to take an automatic screenshot of whatever you're doing, and it will then create a box around what you've highlighted and will generate the step for you. So it significantly decreases the amount of time, which is amazing. So here I have, again, like my course title, but what I have done, and I showed on this presentation here, is I have a chat bot for my asynchronous courses, like I mentioned. And so I do ask my students if they have specific questions around course or assignment expectations to try the chat bot first. And if they don't get a good answer, to then contact me afterwards. And I found that it's been really helpful, and then my students will give me feedback on that. In addition to using a chat bot for syllabus or content, and one of the questions was asking about uploading your own material in an intellectual property concern. And so it is, right, when you are adding content into kind of the metaverse, right, into the AI algorithm, generally, right, it is always then being used to teach the system. I know within my work-based account, my data is not being used to train kind of the larger model. And often in the paid versions, I know in like ChatGPT Workspace, the data that you input is not utilized to train the model. I'm skeptical of kind of the truth of that, but there are ways to safeguard in terms of putting proprietary information. I will say that generally in much of the content that I create, I'm okay and often will provide it for everyone, just as I have done like today. But I will kind of use and feel comfortable with AI. I don't feel comfortable. So if I'm ever like drafting an article with a colleague, I don't feel comfortable then utilizing AI to provide, grammar or professional tone without asking permission from someone who has co-authored something with me. So I do feel like there are kind of lines that you need to acknowledge, because when you do add content into like an AI tool, it can technically be utilized to contribute to the engine. Okay. Another piece that I wanted to share, another use case of a GPT. So I teach again about assistive technology and kind of matching tools to individuals' needs. And so what I've done is I take all of my course materials that I'm working with my students and I load them into, I call her my assistive tech matchmaker. And my students just recently had their clinical experience, and it helps to just kind of compile all of the resources that they've learned in class into one area where they can then ask questions back and forth. So it takes for this culminating experience, it was 3 courses of content, and I added all of the content from those courses into this GPT to help them support their clients and to help them to then refresh all of the tools and resources that they've learned. And what I also did is tried to train the bot to make sure that it was a person-centered planning versus tech-centered, which can be a big challenge. And so it helped me to kind of adjust the thinking of my students as they were using my resource as well. Here are just some other AI for education resources. This is one of my absolute favorite webinar websites to utilize, specifically AI for education. They have webinars, prompt libraries. I find their webinars are very high quality. This is a lot more for like a K through 12 environment, some for teachers, but for if any of you are in the education space, I do love that. And here are just kind of some examples, and some of them can be utilized for the K through 12 environment or the higher ed environment. So I'm going to look at some others too before I get to our questions in the chat. So now I want to talk a little bit about slide generation and presentation generation. Oh, good. So in the chat, someone stated in our institutional Copilot, it's a closed system, which is similar to mine. So any attachments uploaded do not go back out to train the model, which is an important concept. And in Perplexity, there is a setting, even with a free account, to block sending materials out to the large language model. and being aware, right, that that's an option for many of these tools. I am still skeptical because there really isn't regulation of AI tools in companies at this point in time. I still get weary, even when they say that they're closed systems. So I really reinforce, like, make sure you do not put any sensitive medical, financial, or personal secure data, especially into an AI engine. But often you can kind of provide that. Let's see. So Kim asked an interesting question in the chat about asking about writing courses. We want students to do their own writing so they can learn to become better writers. Any suggestions for using AI in helpful ways in a writing class? So I'm going to skip just to address this question before I talk about slide designers. One of the things that I did in one of my classes is introduce kind of ChatGPT and focus on having my students ask ChatGPT to write a research article. So they were required to do like a literature review and complete a template of like literature in a table. But afterwards, I asked them to have ChatGPT write their paper for them, and then they needed to add comments within the paper to reflect on the points and whether or not they are valid. And I think this does kind of address the next question of how we can use AI to improve students' critical thinking. I actually found that in this new iteration of this paper, so instead of having my students, write the paper from scratch, I'm having them kind of do the literature. They will do a literature review, ask ChatGPT to write the literature paper, and then they often find that ChatGPT fabricated research. But I have very specific, and I included the rubric for you as well if you were interested. But here they have a very specific expectation of what they are doing, how they are using AI, and the pieces in which they are expected to utilize themselves. So I have asked them to use, again, ChatGPT, but then afterwards, what I asked them to do is critically analyze the paper, adding comments, reflecting on the validity of the hypothesis, analysis of the resources. So they're adding comments in, which again is kind of a more, I'm looking at their critical thinking, right? I want them to analyze the writing style of the particular GPT. And they also then need to link back and share the conversation that they have with the GPT as well. So I do find, and there are lots of ways to then harness the use of AI, I believe, to enhance that critical thinking piece. And so I had them, and I included in my presentation for you some of my student responses, because I could tell them, right, that like AI is not the be all end all. It's kind of, it fabricates things, but this I find going through this experience and then asking them to reflect upon it afterwards really then kind of showed them specifically that like, oh, wow. AI needs clear set of directions, right? It will fabricate things. So I did put, these are kind of quite lengthy responses, but I put them on here for you just to kind of give you context of how it was really helpful for them. And I do believe it reflected a higher level of critical thinking for my students versus then just having them write the paper. This one was my favorite. Here, the student said, when I first read through the paper, it looked great, just like a shiny car. As I delve into the paper, our shiny car turned out to have a bad engine. It wasn't worth the cost. and they really kind of came up with these reflections kind of in this whole experience. And again, I had kind of multiple different learning objectives at the end beyond just analyzing research and looking at this critical area within special ed. Now I'm gonna jump back quickly because some of my other the slide designer piece. So this is where I feel like As an instructor, I particularly like this piece. Slides.io. So I'm going to share kind of two different slide designer pieces, especially as you are presenting content. If you are a professional and you have content that you need to share, and the content as the content area expert, asking kind of one of these generative AI tools to develop the presentation that you are presenting, I find really drastically reduces the amount of time I might need into a kind of preparatory situation. These ones, again, it all depends on the prompt. And I will tell you that I have found that the quality of the content embedded in many of these prompts is problematic. So I will not depend on the content within many of these prompts or these tools. So Slides.io is the first one. And on this presentation, I'm not going to go through them, but I included examples. So my prompt was artificial intelligence in higher ed, add pictures and 8 slides. And so here the next 8 slides are just kind of what AI generated for me. And you can kind of clearly see what it automatically did. And it's like, a very bland presentation system. But what I kind of really emphasize that if you are the expert within your content, you can either speak to this or you can make sure that you are the human in the loop, right? And that's always my reinforcement to my students, to my colleagues, is that we are the humans in the loop and we are the ones that need to audit this content. So if it reduces the amount of time it takes for you to develop the slides, you now have that time in order to audit content. I know for me, I really utilize AI in kind of like the prep space, so that I can conserve my time so that I can meaningfully grade my students' papers. I don't use AI for the grading process because in my kind of teaching philosophy, like that's where I'm kind of providing that learning, that instruction, and that piece for my students. And so it's also kind of learning, again, I think Jay wrote in the chat, right, where its limitations are, right? Specifically when it comes to specific tasks and within your own practice, identifying where it works and then where it doesn't. And for me, it doesn't work for grading. And so I use it to kind of save some time on the front end so that I can commit more time to my grading and my feedback for my students. The tool that I like more specifically is Gamma AI. And so this one is a presentation supporter. I do find that there is more diversity within the pictures that it will automatically generate, but there's still kind of, it's a work in progress. But I do like the quality of these presentations better. You can see definite trends here within each of them. One of my biggest pet peeves is whenever you try and have AI create an image, it always spells things wrong. So it's not worth the time, in my opinion, to have it do things. But it created this again with like no specific content with just that prompt. I knew I over prepped, so I'm going to stop now. You do have access to my presentation, but I'm going to look at some of the questions in the chat that I missed. And so I do know that we had the question earlier about AI implications for water and electricity consumption. And that's where I think it's really focusing a lot on balancing, right? And acknowledging and sharing that with our students. Because I think some of our students don't even realize that there is an energy consumption relationship with AI. Let's see, I did that. So there was a question in the chat about AI in research and teaching is like cheating. The technology does the work for you. As a teacher, how can you ensure that students use AI as an aid and still keep learning analytical and critical thinking skills? So I personally, the way that I've done this is first in terms of the cheating piece. So I do see kind of like how it's called co-pilot, right? When AI is used well and used appropriately, it is a co-pilot, right? It is in no way kind of the driving force or the entire process. It is a tool similar to a calculator, similar to a keyboard. And it can help you to then as a professor, as a researcher, as a creator, it can then help you to implement and kind of see your vision or your idea come to life. I do have kind of very specific pieces when I'm working with students on kind of assignments where they can use AI, and I encourage them to use AI, and where I don't allow them to use AI. I also find too that I do have an AI statement about using it as a tool to supplement their learning versus as the learning process. The more you get comfortable with AI, I do find it's pretty easy to spot when a student is just copying and pasting. And I am very transparent with my classes that like it is not allowed. They are still learning, they're paying money to learn, and I don't want them to then miss that learning piece. Let's see, let me go. We talked about intellectual property. As a teacher, you use AI to create a syllabus or to grade assignments. Will students or anyone else be able to tell that you used AI? So I'd say it all depends, right? So I am, again, like a very big proponent in like, it should be a piece of the creation. It is not the entire creation process. So if you are not adding kind of your human self, your own touch, it is pretty obvious, I believe, if you use AI and strictly present it. I will also, because I expect my students to be transparent, I am also transparent with them when I am, using AI to create something, right? I used AI to create this activity, or I used AI, because I also want their feedback. I think I did share, what I did with my students is I did an asynchronous class, and I wanted to kind of compare AI created materials and instructor created materials. And in my very, very small sample set, but this was powerful for me, is that my students, although the AI materials were generally more interactive, you will see the red is my direct instructor materials, and those were more relevant, more rigorous, appropriate for their learning needs, right? So I knew that then I always need to be the human in the loop. It needs to have my touch on it. I can use it for pieces, but not the whole thing. Closed pilot, right? We talked about that. Oh, this is really interesting. Linda shared in the chat, Northeastern students flag professors' use of ChatGPT and demands a refund of $8,000 tuition fee. And so again, I think it, just as a professor and another, right? We don't want, everything shouldn't be fully dependent on the AI engine. We need to be that, again, the human in the loop, and constantly, that's my mantra. And it needs to be a tool that we use to accomplish our goal. It isn't the goal. And I think Jay talks about that as well, right? AI is a supplement to my research and day-to-day work, right? It is a co-pilot, right? It helps you. It's something to bounce ideas off of. But recognizing its limitations is crucial. And sometimes the only way to do that is to engage with this. Yeah, so Nathan but Nathan's chat, I'm just going to read Nathan's chat. I'm considering having students read a textbook chapter, come up with 2 to 3 questions, then discuss those with an AI. Concerned with the AI that the AI will sometimes be wrong. Do you think it's worthwhile activities? Yes, and one of the tools that I really like is Charlie. This one is funny because it will also create, like, I like it because it will create like a meme, or so it adds humor to the content, but they can have a conversation. But I think if it's wrong, then it actually kind of brings a nice, even more critical thinking to the experience. I've also used Notebook AI. Oh, I'm running over, I know, but Notebook AI will, you can take content and it will create a podcast, and the podcast is like beautifully natural. But what I did is I had my students analyze the content validity, right? You read the article, now analyze the accuracy of the AI generated podcast. Did it have an appropriate representation of the content? And many of them were like, no. And so I'm having them do these activities so that they see that depending on AI for their learning actually misrepresents a lot of the content. I'm so sorry I ran a little bit over. I didn't get to all the questions or to all of my slides, but thank you all. This was a great conversation. And I think we could continue on. So I hope that that was helpful for everyone. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This was fascinating. And I hope you just take a moment to see all of the positive feedback in the chat. I think everybody really got a lot out of it. Folks, I'm hoping to convince Lauren to come back and do another session with us. She certainly has the material for it.
Yeah.
So please stay tuned for future ISA webinar events that are coming up. And thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.